Can you see that? Let's practice our, if you put your analog glasses, you should see that in 3D, okay? So here's an outline of my presentation. It's about wildlife in 3D. So what exactly is wildlife? Uh, I define this as animals that cannot be approached closely. That includes animals in the wild like birds, ducks, frogs, foxes, deer here in this area. Also, animals around the house. If you have a bird feeder, birds around the bird feeder. And here we have raccoons, squirrels, and finally, animals in captivity, like a zoo. Now, why am I interested in this kind of photography? Well, I find it challenging and fascinating to see something that normally you cannot see it close enough to photograph it and look at it in 3D. What equipment can we use? Because we need to keep a distance, a stereo camera, it's not the best tool because the stereo base, the distance between the lens is small and the focal length is relatively short. So the best choice, I think, is to use twin cameras, two cameras with long focal length lenses. So I'm going to discuss this topic. I'm going to show you examples of pictures I've taken. And if you have this setup, you can do other things than wildlife. And finally, if you refuse to get in these twin cameras, there are some alternatives to take these pictures with the equipment that you already have. By the way, I want to say that my definition of wildlife is the opposite of macro 3D photography. You might say, well, isn't bees and butterflies wildlife? Yes, but in macro photography, you get close and you have a short stereo base, and now I'm looking to staying far away and have a wider base. One thing I want to mention is what exactly is the focal length? This is interesting. I said you need long focal length lenses. Back in 2017, you can study this later, but I gave a presentation about lenses, and in the middle of the presentation, somebody raised their hand and asked me, what is it, what exactly is focal length? Which kind of threw me off because I had already mentioned focal length like a dozen times. Plus, I had assumed that everybody in the room, most people from film photography understood the concept. But today we cannot make this assumption anymore. So anyway, if you look at the little diagram in the left right here, it classifies the lenses starting from the left, wide angle, normal, medium telephoto, and there are some numbers associated with that. Like if you say 35 millimeter, I know it's a wide angle lens. But at the bottom, see what happens as you increase the focal length. Basically, you narrow the angle of view and you increase the magnification. And by the way, I have to say that my iPhone 13 has three lenses. The difference is that each lens is a different focal length, and but they're named 1x, half x, 3x, things like that. But if you look at the numbers, I realize that the one they consider a telephoto lens is a 52 millimeter focal length. It's really more like a normal lens. It's not a very strong telephoto. Anyway, let's say you decide to go this route and find two cameras with long focal length lenses. There are basically three choices. The smallest one, there's compact travel cameras, which are small cameras. You cannot change the lens. They have a smaller sensor. Some of them have very long zoom lenses and they're called super zoom. If you Google super zoom travel cameras, you will see that basically almost every company offers one of those. The next step is the so-called bridge cameras because they bridge the gap between the compact and the ones where you change the lens. Now, the bridge cameras also have fixed lenses, long zoom, and they're bigger in size. And I successfully used two of those, the Panasonic FZ2500, and I think the best bridge camera is the Sony RX10 IV. The zoom is from 24 to 600 millimeters, which is extremely long, and I've taken some very nice pictures with this setup. But eventually I sold them and I went to number three. Because I already have two cameras that take interchangeable lenses, I can use them for wildlife by using long focal length lenses. Where do you find the lenses? Well, the manufacturer sells them. If you want to save some money, usually they're third-party lenses. And finally, there are vintage or legacy lenses that you can buy very inexpensively and fit them to your digital camera with an adapter. there are two challenges if you decide to go this way. One, you're using twin cameras, so you have to worry about synchronization, how to put the cameras together, how to process your pictures. But there are special challenges because you use long lenses, and this have to do with alignment. Let me show you this. In this example, I have two cameras with the same camera, same lenses, same mounting, and yet you see one is a little bit lower than the other. What happens if you're working at high magnification? This magnifies the errors. So alignment becomes important. And the other thing, if you point the two cameras straight and you look at something close, you realize if the cameras are parallel, the left camera is looking on the left side, the right camera on the right side. So you lose a lot of image. So it's very important that to converge, the cameras have to converge to the subject you photograph, which I illustrate here. You have to twist them. They point at one subject, and if you use autofocus, then the cameras correctly focus at what you're looking at. This convergence is actually necessary if you work with long focal length lenses. Now, so you have your two cameras, you're ready to put them together. Well, how do you put them together? The most obvious way is to put them side by side. It's just the simplest way. So I had this nice setup and I was using it, taking pictures of the birds in my backyard. And then one day I decided to take this outside in the wild to photograph some birds. Well, it turns out it was impossible because let's say I see a bird, then I look at it, I try to find with my left camera, then I have to look at what the right is looking at. By the time I did all that, the bird flew away. Eventually, I realized that putting them vertically is actually a little bit better. Allows me to fix them horizontally, align them, and then I can converge them. And then I had this fine idea to turn them top to top so I can look through the viewfinders. And this is what I'm using most of the time. And basically, this is like a big pair of binoculars. I don't know how many of you use binoculars to look at birds, but it's still kind of a challenge to find what you're looking at, but it's a lot easier when you look through both cameras, you see your subject in 3D, you can converge them and you take the picture. If you see something that you like, you take the picture and then it stays there in the viewfinder so you can study it for a while. So this is the configuration that I like. This is my current rig for wildlife. I'm using two Sony A7R4 cameras and I have two pairs of lenses. This one is a little bit heavier. The cameras are on vertical mounts and on a horizontal bar so you can adjust their spacing. I can rotate the vertical mounts to converge them. And look at the right picture. I have a little pouch I put here on my belt and I support them on this monopod. So because this is a heavy thing, your hands will get tired and there's no way to put this in a bag. So I just let it rest over there. This is my other rig. The lens is here a little bit smaller. The vertical mounts are a little bit simpler. I also explain what this A7R4 means. And by the way, I'm going to give you a link to my notes, but you're also going to have the video if you want to read some of my title slides. One advantage of having those two cameras is I can always use them in a different way as a standard stereo camera instead of just doing wildlife. With that said, I'm going to show you some examples, and now we're switching to anaglyph, okay? Let's start with this guy here. I took this with Panasonic GX7 and 300mm lenses side by side. This bird is a blue jay that's in my backyard. I love those birds, they're my favorite. Every morning I feed them peanuts and they pose for me, so we have a very good relationship. I don't know how many of you recognize this is a squirrel. They're abandoned here. They come to my backyard and eat the peanuts that I have for the blue jays. So it's kind of annoying, but they pose for me too. So I just let them have the peanuts. My sister in Greece has never seen a squirrel, so she's fascinated seeing how many of those are around. By the way, let me point something. What is the background? What happened to the background in this picture and in this? Looks like the background has disappeared. I don't have any cardboard or anything. What happens is when you use long focal length lenses and you come relatively close, and I also have the aperture wide open, the distant background is thrown out of focus, which is very nice because any kind of background will be distracting in this kind of pictures. This is a northern green frog. It looks like I'm close to it, but I'm not really close because if I was that close, the frog would jump in the water, it would not let me approach that close. So I'm a few meters away and I'm able with my long distance lenses to take this kind of picture. This is a hawk and it's in captivity in a bird rehabilitation center. There's something interesting about this picture. I told you that the lenses throw the background out of focus. Well, the hawk is inside a cage, and the cage has wires, very close spacing, so I cannot go between the wires. So I've taken this picture with the wires right in front of my lenses. If you do that with a small camera like the Fuji, you will see those wires just block your view. But for the same reason that the background is out of focus, also the foreground is completely out of focus. There's a little bit of a black band showing, but it's really nothing in front of the face of the hawk. So that's a very good thing for me. I can take pictures of animals in a cage without seeing the cage wires. This is a bald eagle that was in a museum of natural history here in Cleveland. It's far away from me. I've zoomed all the way in and then I crop to increase the magnification further. These birds are called barn swallows. They tend to make nests in barns or buildings. Now let me show you how I took this one. So the birds have a nest in the corner of this building. To get closer, I stepped at the top of the bench. I don't recommend you do that because if you lose your balance, a lot of bad things are going to happen to your cameras and your body too. Anyway, now I'm going to show you the same picture taken with the Fuji camera. This is with the Fuji W3, zoomed all the way to maybe 135 millimeters, the maximum zoom. You see, I'm still far away. I cannot get a decent wildlife picture with the Fuji. Now you might say to me, well, why don't you blow it up 10 times? Will that work? Well, you don't really have the resolution to do that. If you blow it up, you're never going to get the kind of quality that I've gotten here using the Sony RX10, zoom at 600 millimeter and then crop even further. The total effective focal length is over 1,000. It's like using a telescope from this distance. Okay, now assume you have this setup. You already have your twin cameras. You can do more things than wildlife. You can take pictures that look like close-up. You can take portraits. You can take long distance action. And I'm going to show you a few of those now. This is a bee on the wall. I came as close as I could focus my Sony cameras. And this is kind of a beetle. I've used I've used my long lenses and you see how the background, I don't have to worry about the background because it got pretty much eliminated out of focus. I have a hummingbird feeder. The distance between that and inside my house is 4 meters. So I slide the door and I put my cameras there and the hummingbirds, which are really tiny birds, they come to the feeder and then I photograph them. Now, in this case, I used an artificial cardboard. There was no way, the background was pretty close and was distracting, so I put a piece of gray cardboard in the back. I was at a club meeting in Ohio and John Bisi was on the other side of the room and I was just testing the camera. I said, look, guys, and I said to John, smile. I just took this picture. It turned out to be a very nice portrait of John, but this is one of my favorites. We're on a boat on a wedding party, and this lady is across the boat from me. She has no idea she's being photographed. And I got this beautiful portrait of her smoking, and you can see the reflections in the glasses. So I can use the same thing to take portraits from a distance. And also in this case, there is some action in the lake. And of course, I cannot swim in the lake to take pictures. So I'm staying outside, I'm zooming in. So I use the setup for more than wildlife. The last topic I want to discuss is, well, let's say you tell me that you don't want to get involved with twin cameras. Can you use what you have now to take wildlife? The answer is yes, you can do some things, maybe not the best. For example, can you take sequential pictures? Well, if your animal doesn't move, and there are some animals like owls, notoriously sit there completely still. If you have something with a long lens, maybe Oktai saw me a phone made in China where it has a lens that's 100x. There he's pointing his. This is an amazing, amazing phone. You can use that to take an owl far away on a tree. The owl won't move. You can do your cha-cha thing and you do that. Another option is if you can fire the camera remotely, you can set the camera close to the feeder and then go inside the house. And when you see a bird, you just fire it. Even the Fuji actually, somebody was converting them with a remote. So that's another option. You can capture wildlife without you being close, but the cameras are close. And the last thing, if you have a camera with high resolution sensor and good quality lenses, you can crop, and there's a lot you can do when you do that. Let me show you some of those in 3D now. In this one, I use my Samsung NX1000 cameras with 45 millimeter lenses. I set them close to the feeder and I was inside the house. So when I saw a bird, I took a picture. This one won best image of the year last year in Ohio, I think. And I didn't have to get close. Of course, the lenses are not really wide. When I say 45 millimeter, it's a crop factor of 2x, it's 90. So it's a little bit long, but not extremely long. Oh, this is funny. So this raccoon is coming and disturbs my feeders. And I saw this guy, he will come every day at 3 in the afternoon. So I opened the sliding door, ready with my regular cameras with wide angle lens. So he jumped into the deck and I snapped the picture of him and then he ran away. So basically I use wide angle lens and I cropped a little bit. So if you are lucky, yep, maybe you can do that. And finally, if you go to a zoo, like in this picture, there are animals in captivity that you can photograph with normal cameras and basically get a decent wildlife picture. And finally, regarding the cropping, one day I went to the Toledo Zoo and I didn't have my long lenses. All I have was 28 to 60 millimeter lens. So I zoomed at 60 millimeters and I took the picture you see at the top. This is exactly the full frame I took. And then I cropped. I cropped 6 times and I got the picture at the bottom. So essentially I changed my 60 millimeter focal length to equivalent of 360, which is a pretty long, decent lens. And this is the picture. So that looks great to me. Now, if you use your Fuji though, you're gonna zoom in and you can crop. You're limited on how much you will crop because you don't have enough resolution or very good image quality. However, there are programs, giga, how is that called? Anyway, I forget the name, that will upscale your picture. So if your picture is small or low resolution, they do a pretty job in upscaling them. This completes my presentation. I'm going to summarize. I told you what I define as wildlife, animals that cannot be approached closely. There is more than real wild animals around the house, birds, animals in captivity, etc. I find this challenging. It's not easy to do, but it's fascinating if you do it well. The best equipment are 2 cameras with long lenses. I show you some examples. If you have this setup, you can do a lot more things than wildlife. And finally, if you really don't want to go to that route, all it takes is, keep an open mind and use what you have, find the appropriate subject, and you can take some interesting pictures. Thanks a lot. Any